One of the considerable concerns, which will probably have long-standing effects, particularly to the tourism industry, is that in the wake of the violence which is now perpetrating across the country, this has cancelled flights. It has cancelled the ability for tourists to get to airports to try and get flights out of the country. And some of the tourists are even so directly affected that they have been told to stay within the hotels, and there are limited food and resources available to sustain, obviously, the support and the life support, especially for tourists within those hotels, which would then potentially expose them to greater vulnerability, needing to leave the hotels to go to local cafes, restaurants, supermarkets. And as we've seen, certainly the cartel have been attacking supermarkets like Costco, especially. And the cartel have also made it very clear that it's not just the Mexican government they're opposed to and will retaliate against, but also anything associated to the United States, within which that will include potentially tourists as well. With the imminent 2026 FIFA tournament, which will be taking place in Guadalajara, this raises some significant concerns that FIFA are going to have to consider as to whether Mexico is a viable location for the games to be hosted, because we can see the cartel are dominating, certainly, the control of these areas. They are causing widespread chaos, setting alight not only shops, offices, but also vehicles in the street, which could make it prohibitive not only for certainly US travelers who are intending to attend the games, but any other international community. And we will even have to watch the Foreign Commonwealth Office's advice as it currently stands as to whether tourists would be advised to go there. Now, where this has implications is even if supporters feel that they can go down there safely, if the State Department for the United States and the FCO, the Foreign Commonwealth Office for the UK, classify as prohibited and a high risk, this would void any travel insurance that supporters could have if they go into the country, but also may limit the capability for both governments to be able to respond to evacuate in extremis tourists from the location should it flare up or continue to flare.
Los niveles de gobierno. El objetivo principal durante esta jornada ha sido salvaguardar la seguridad de las personas. Por eso desde temprano, desde esta mesa de seguridad que se encuentra en sesión permanente, activamos el código rojo, mismo que continúa hasta este momento.
What we've seen with the cartel is that they will carry out some horrific attacks, one of which was notable last year, was 15 Mexican law enforcement personnel being killed, which is the highest loss that the Mexican law enforcement agencies have suffered at the hands of any cartel. They will also intimidate on a local level, and their distribution networks are controlled as much by intimidation as it is by sophistication and by weaponry and the capabilities of being able to move their product internationally. But where this works exceptionally well, as we've seen with, say, terrorist organizations like Islamic State, which is a pretty close comparable to how they operate, is that they will strike fear into local communities. And so local communities will not, in a traditional sense, aid or assist law enforcement. And individuals have been kidnapped. They have even taken families where they've killed every member of a family, including down to their pets, to show that the force that they will actually impose on individuals that are disloyal or betray the cartel in any shape or form.
Pues mira, ahorita toda la gente estamos asustados. Nadie queremos salir. Ahorita casi nada más para lo más necesario, porque pues ahora sí que la ciudadanía ya no sabe ni cómo salir ni qué hacer.
The Jalisco New Generation Cartel has always operated by what they call a hub and spoke structure. Now, a hub and spoke structure means that El Mencho had very much the control at the hub of the operations, both nationally and internationally. Now, internationally, this particular cartel has stretched its tendrils into the gateways of Spain for the distribution of both cocaine and fentanyl, and also meth as one of its primary products, through into Asia, into West Africa, into other parts of Latin America, using most of Central America certainly as a conduit for trafficking drugs up into the United States. But this cartel isn't just a narcotic-based cartel. They are involved in arms, in people trafficking, in a wide diversity of organized crime. And probably the best way to describe this cartel would be akin to Islamic State, in terms of how ISIS has controlled local areas, neighborhoods, communities, and enforced them with high levels of kidnapping, intimidation, and threats of various different types. So in terms of their capability, even though El Mencho, who had a $10 million bounty on his head by the DEA, removing him, yes, will cause some disruption, but I seriously doubt that it's going to have any long-term impact on their operations. We know that the US provided intelligence for the Menasco-Jalisco raid, and we know that they provided, certainly that would have included satellite imagery and certainly live feeds in terms of movements, particularly of the targets that the Mexican Special Forces were going to concentrate on and focus on. But what we do know is that this was taking out El Mencho. It was not taking out factories or manufacturing centers. So as a direct result, trade will probably continue as it has before, albeit under new leadership, which may yet to be established. But certainly in terms of Mexico's relationship with the United States, it has been somewhat a forced relationship for Mexico because of the influx of cocaine and fentanyl, particularly, and also human trafficking into the United States. And Trump, through a combination of tariffs, a combination of trade impositions onto Mexico, they know that they have to collaborate. And unfortunately, they're in at the deep end with the United States. Now, that's not to say that there weren't tier one US Special Forces operators who were actually involved in this most recent assault operation. However, it's whether this will continue and there will be a collaboration between Mexican forces and special forces with US special forces together. This again in itself creates its own internal war. And whether this can be sustained and Mexico can sustain this support is another matter. So this is a watching brief for the time being. It's almost like dropping the pebble in the pond to see the reverberations. How much taking out the leader will have had effect on the cartel. At the moment, we're seeing them angrily revenge, obviously, his death, but whether this has any implications in terms of reducing their power, I think that's questionable right now, and we have to watch and see.